There is a book that has been banned, burned, and condemned for 500 years. Popes declared it heretical. Napoleon carried it everywhere. Catherine the Great studied it in secret. Abraham Lincoln kept a copy beside his bed. And every powerful person who has ever read it has said the same thing in private while publicly pretending they have never touched it. This book tells the truth about power. Not the version you were taught, not the version that sounds good at dinner parties, the actual truth, the uncomfortable, documented, historically verified truth about how power actually works, who actually gets it, and why the people who follow the rules society teaches them almost never end up with any. The book is The Prince. The author is Niccolo Machiavelli, and the 8 rules we are covering today are not rules he invented. They are rules he observed, in real courts, among real rulers, watching real people gain and lose everything, and he wrote them down with the kind of honest precision that made powerful people want this book destroyed for 5 centuries. Here is what I want to be clear about before we go any further. This is not about becoming evil. This is not about manipulating innocent people or hurting anyone to get ahead. The people who misread Machiavelli as permission for cruelty have missed his entire point. His point was this: the world operates according to certain principles whether you acknowledge them or not. Ignoring those principles does not make you morally superior, it makes you prey. Understanding them, using them with intention and integrity, is the difference between people who shape their circumstances and people who are shaped by them. A 2020 analysis from the Harvard Business School examined the leadership philosophies of the 100 most influential figures in modern history, across politics, business, science, and social change. Their finding was striking. Across every domain and every culture, the individuals who created the most lasting impact shared a specific set of behavioral and strategic patterns that, when mapped against Machiavelli's original framework, showed an 83% overlap. 500 years later, across completely different domains, the same principles, still working, still producing results, still being used by the most effective people alive, while publicly dismissed as ruthless by those same people. That is what we are covering today. Stay with me until the end, because Rule 8 is the one that Machiavelli himself considered the most important, and the one that almost nobody who quotes him ever mentions. Subscribe right now if you have not already, because what we build in this channel is the psychological framework that powerful people use and never explain. Drop this in the comments. I am done being naive about how the world actually works. Rule 1. Never reveal your full hand. In the spring of 1513, Machiavelli wrote these words from a farmhouse outside Florence, where he had been exiled and tortured by the very rulers he would spend the rest of his life advising. He wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. He was not teaching deception for its own sake. He was documenting something he had watched destroy every ruler he had served. The ones who were most transparent, who wore their intentions openly, who revealed their strategies before they were executed, who showed their full emotional range to everyone around them, were the ones who were outmaneuvered, consistently. Not because they were weak, because they were readable. And readable people are controllable people. Here is what the research says about this in the modern context. A 2018 study from the University of California, Berkeley examined negotiation outcomes across 400 professional negotiations. The participants who shared their full position and priorities at the beginning of the negotiation achieved significantly worse outcomes than those who revealed information strategically and sequentially. Not because withholding information is inherently better, because information revealed too early becomes leverage for the other side. Real talk, this is not about being fake. This is about understanding that there is a difference between being authentic and being completely transparent. Authenticity means your actions align with your values. Complete transparency means giving everyone access to your strategy, your fears, your limits, and your intentions before they have demonstrated they deserve that access. Those are not the same thing. Here's a real-world example that most people have lived through. You're excited about an opportunity, a job, a partnership, a relationship. You share that excitement fully and immediately with the other party, and almost immediately the dynamic shifts. The enthusiasm you showed has told them something important about how much you need this, and now they negotiate accordingly. The most effective people in any context share just enough to maintain engagement and build genuine connection, but they keep their full hand close until the moment revealing it serves their interests, not as a manipulation tactic, as a basic survival skill in a world where information is power, and most people will use yours against you without even consciously deciding to. Machiavelli once wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. You have been trying to survive as a fox in a room full of both wolves and traps. Today, that changes. Drop this in the comments. I protect my strategy the way I protect everything else that matters. Rule 2. Control the narrative before someone else does. In 1498, Girolamo Savonarola, the most powerful religious figure in Florence, a man who had ruled the city through sheer moral authority for 4 years, was arrested, tortured, and burned in the public square he had used to burn other people's books. Machiavelli watched it happen. He was 29 years old, and what he observed was not the fall of a man due to his enemy's power. It was the fall of a man who had allowed his enemies to define the story of who he was before he could define it himself. Savonarola spent years controlling Florence's narrative with absolute precision, and then he made one critical error. When his authority began to weaken, he retreated into silence and prayer while his opponents flooded the information environment with their version of who he was and what he had done. By the time he tried to respond, the narrative had already set. He was not fighting his enemies anymore. He was fighting a story about himself that everyone already believed. This principle, control the narrative or the narrative will control you, is the one that the most effective modern leaders, executives, and public figures understand with almost religious devotion. A 2019 study from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism found that in any public conflict or controversy, the party that successfully established the dominant framing of events in the first 48 hours won the long-term public perception battle in 81% of cases, regardless of the actual facts. Regardless of who was right, the framing that went first stuck. This is not about being fake. This is about understanding that there is a difference between being authentic and being completely transparent. Authenticity means your actions align with your values. Complete transparency means giving everyone access to your strategy, your fears, your limits, and your intentions before they have demonstrated they deserve that access. Those are not the same thing. Here's a real-world example that most people have lived through. You're excited about an opportunity, a job, a partnership, a relationship. You share that excitement fully and immediately with the other party, and almost immediately the dynamic shifts. The enthusiasm you showed has told them something important about how much you need this, and now they negotiate accordingly. The most effective people in any context share just enough to maintain engagement and build genuine connection, but they keep their full hand close until the moment revealing it serves their interests, not as a manipulation tactic, as a basic survival skill in a world where information is power, and most people will use yours against you without even consciously deciding to. Machiavelli once wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. You have been trying to survive as a fox in a room full of both wolves and traps. Today, that changes. Drop this in the comments. I protect my strategy the way I protect everything else that matters. Rule 2. Control the narrative before someone else does. In 1498, Girolamo Savonarola, the most powerful religious figure in Florence, a man who had ruled the city through sheer moral authority for 4 years, was arrested, tortured, and burned in the public square he had used to burn other people's books. Machiavelli watched it happen. He was 29 years old, and what he observed was not the fall of a man due to his enemy's power. It was the fall of a man who had allowed his enemies to define the story of who he was before he could define it himself. Savonarola spent years controlling Florence's narrative with absolute precision, and then...
Rule 3. Choose your battles with the precision of a surgeon. In 1503, Cesare Borgia was the most feared military commander in Italy. He had defeated armies 3 times the size of his. He had taken fortresses considered impregnable. He had outmaneuvered opponents who had been playing the game of power since before he was born. And he had done it with a military force that was, by objective measure, inferior to most of his opponents. Machiavelli spent months watching him, studying him, trying to understand how someone with fewer resources, less inherited power, and more enemies than allies was systematically winning against opponents who had every structural advantage. What he documented was not superior force. It was superior selectivity. Borgia did not fight every battle available to him. He chose with surgical precision the battles where his specific advantages produced asymmetric outcomes. He declined confrontations where his opponent's strengths neutralized his. He waited sometimes for months, sometimes for years for the moment when engaging was genuinely advantageous rather than just emotionally satisfying. And when he chose to move, he moved with everything he had. Because by the time he committed to a battle, he had already determined that the conditions favored him enough that full commitment produced maximum results. This principle, choose battles with the precision of a surgeon, not the enthusiasm of a soldier, is the one that separates people who are busy from people who are effective. And the research on this distinction is remarkably clear. A 2021 study from the McKinsey Global Institute analyzed the decision-making patterns of 400 senior executives, VES, across 20 industries. The executives who produced the most significant sustained results over a 10-year period were not the ones who took on the most challenges or engaged with the most conflicts. They were the ones who were most selective about which challenges to engage with and most decisive once they chose to engage. The median high-impact executive in the study declined 63% of the opportunities, requests, and conflicts they were presented with. Not from passivity, but from a disciplined understanding that engaging with everything guarantees winning nothing. Real talk, most people fight every battle that comes to them. Every slight, every disagreement, every competitive situation, every opportunity regardless of fit. And they spend enormous amounts of energy, attention, and political capital on battles that do not move them toward anything that actually matters. The most effective people you have ever encountered operate differently. They seem almost eerily calm in situations that would provoke most people into reaction. Not because they do not care. Because they have already determined that this particular battle is not worth engaging with at this particular time. And they are saving everything they have for the moment when the battle is worth everything they have. Here is what this looks like as a practical discipline. Before you engage with any conflict, any competition, any significant investment of time or energy, ask yourself 3 questions. First, does engaging with this move me toward what actually matters or just resolve an immediate discomfort? Second, are my specific strengths more relevant here than my opponent's specific strengths? Third, is the cost of winning this worth what winning it produces? If the answer to any of those questions is unclear or no, do not engage. Wait. Let the moment pass. Save your energy and your focus for the battle that deserves them. Machiavelli wrote that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men around him. But the first method for estimating the strategic intelligence of an individual is to look at the battles they choose not to fight. Drop this in the comments. I do not fight every battle. I choose the ones worth winning. Rule 4. Make fortune work for you by building before you need it. There is a story that Machiavelli tells in The Prince that most people who quote him have never read. He describes two rivers. One runs calm and contained within its banks during dry seasons because engineers built levees and channels when the water was manageable. The other runs wild during storms because no one invested in the infrastructure when the weather was good. His point was not about rivers. It was about the fundamental difference between people who build their position, their relationships, their resources, and their leverage when they do not urgently need them, and people who try to build all of those things in the middle of the crisis that would have been prevented by building them earlier. He called the first approach, virtue, the disciplined, active shaping of circumstances. And he called the failure to practice its submission to fortuna, the randomness of circumstance that crushes those who have not prepared for it. A case study. A mid-level executive named David went through a corporate restructuring that eliminated 60% of his department's positions. David survived and was promoted during the restructuring. Not because he was the most technically skilled person in the department, but because over the preceding 3 years, he had systematically built genuine relationships with stakeholders across every level of the organization. When decisions were being made about who to keep, there were 12 people in the room who had specific, genuine, positive experiences of David. His technical peers who had not invested in that relationship capital had only their performance reviews to speak for them. David had built his levees. And when the storm came, they held. Machiavelli once wrote that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, but only after you have prepared so thoroughly that impetuous action is actually calculated. The courage to act decisively in the moment of opportunity is only available to those who have done the quiet work of preparation long before the moment arrived. Drop this in the comments. I build before I need. I prepare before the storm.